I had a loving husband, a good marriage, a family I adored. On paper, my life was perfect. So I'm going to tell you why I threw it all away for a fleeting moment of validation. This isn't just the story of what I did. It's the untold story of the deep, quiet, emotional neglect that pushed me to betray my husband, my family, and in the end, myself. This is the story of why I cheated. And this is my confession about all the reasons that led me there. From the outside, we were the couple everyone wanted to be. We had the house with the picket fence. Not literally, but you get the idea. We had 2 amazing kids who were our entire world. My husband, Lance, was a good man. Truly. He was kind, responsible, a fantastic father, and by any measure, a loving husband. We'd been married for 12 years, and to anyone looking in, we were the definition of stable. Our friends would say things like, "You two are so lucky," or "I wish I had what you have." And I'd just smile and nod, feeling like the biggest fraud in the room. Because behind closed doors, in our perfect home, I was suffocating. The stability everyone else admired felt like a cage. The routine that kept our family running like a well-oiled machine had become so monotonous. It was dulling the spark we once had. I was a wife, a mom, a homemaker, a scheduler, a planner. I was a collection of roles, but I had completely lost track of who I was. I remember looking in the mirror one morning and just not recognizing the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, not from a lack of sleep, but from a profound lack of something. Joy, passion, the feeling of just being seen. Lance and I were great partners. We ran the household, managed the finances, juggled the kids' schedules. We were a team. But we weren't lovers anymore. We weren't confidants. We talked, but we never really communicated. Our conversations were all logistics. Who's picking up the kids? What's for dinner? Does the lawn need mowing? The deeper talks, the ones about our dreams and fears and feelings, those had just evaporated so slowly that I didn't even notice they were gone until all that was left was this deafening silence. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I'd make his favorite dinner and he'd eat it while scrolling through his phone, giving me a quick "thanks, it was good," without ever looking up. I'd get a new haircut, something I did just for me to feel a tiny spark of change, and he wouldn't notice for 3 days. I know these sound like small things, trivial even, but when they pile up, day after day, week after week, they become a mountain of evidence that you are invisible. You start to feel like part of the furniture essential for the house to function, but completely overlooked. This feeling of being unappreciated and just taken for granted was this constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life. I'd later learn that one of the most common reasons women cheat isn't for some dramatic thrill, but because of a deep unhappiness in the relationship, a feeling of being emotionally abandoned. I was living proof of that, a walking cliché I never ever thought I'd become. I was so unhappy, but I couldn't explain why to anyone, let alone myself. How do you tell people that you have everything you ever thought you wanted, but you still feel hollowed out? How do you complain about a good man who just doesn't see you anymore? It felt ungrateful. It felt selfish. So I said nothing. I just smiled, played the part of the happy wife, and felt a tiny piece of myself chip away with every passing day. The affair wasn't the first lie. The first lie was the perfect life I was pretending to live. The emotional neglect wasn't some big, sudden event. It was a slow, creeping frost that just gradually covered everything in our relationship until there was no warmth left. It's the quiet killer of a marriage, not a loud, dramatic explosion. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each one is a tiny dismissal, a forgotten detail, a plea that goes unheard. God, I tried. I really did. In the beginning, I'd try to start those deeper conversations we used to have. I'd wait until the kids were asleep and the house was quiet, and I'd say, "Lance, can we talk?" He'd look up from his laptop, a little annoyed by the interruption, and say, "Sure, what's up?" But his mind was still on his work emails, his posture completely closed off. I'd try to explain how I was feeling, lonely, disconnected, like we were just roommates. I'd say, "I miss us. I miss just talking to you." And he would always respond with logic, not emotion. "We talk every day," he'd say, genuinely confused. "We just talked about the parent-teacher conferences." He couldn't see the canyon-sized difference between coordinating logistics and actual intimacy. To him, if the family was running smoothly, the relationship was fine. My feelings were this abstract problem he didn't know how to solve, so he'd just offer solutions. "Maybe you should get a new hobby," he'd suggest. Or, "You seem stressed, maybe you should try yoga." He wasn't being mean. He was trying to fix it. But what he didn't get was that I wasn't broken. We were. And me trying to connect wasn't a cry for a quick fix. It was a plea for him to just see me, to hear me. Being dismissed like that, having your feelings treated like a problem to be solved instead of something to be shared, is such a core part of feeling neglected. My emotional needs were being completely ignored, and every time I tried to voice them, they were shot down. There's a special kind of loneliness you can only feel when you're with the person who is supposed to be your closest partner. It's feeling alone in a crowded room, but the room is your marriage. I remember one night, I was crying silently in bed after a really hard day with the kids. He rolled over, patted my back awkwardly for a few seconds, and said, "It'll be better tomorrow," before rolling back over and falling asleep. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't hold me. He just offered a platitude because my sadness made him uncomfortable. That night, the space between us in the bed felt like a physical chasm. Our physical intimacy died the same slow death. It became a routine, another task to be checked off a list instead of an act of love and desire. The passion was gone, replaced by a sense of obligation. After a while, my desire for him just faded, not because my libido was gone, but because the emotional connection that fueled it had been totally snuffed out. You can't desire someone who makes you feel invisible. You can't be vulnerable with someone who's emotionally checked out. It felt like my body was just another part of the household he was managing. This slow fade into nothing is what laid the groundwork for what I did. I was starving for a connection, for any sign that I was more than just a cog in the family machine. I was so worn down from years of compromising myself and my own needs being ignored. Our marriage was broken long before I ever stepped outside of it. I felt trapped in this loveless arrangement, and the loneliness was becoming unbearable. I was a good wife and a good mother, but I was also just a woman who wanted to be wanted, a woman who wanted to be seen. And when you're starving, you'll eventually look for food anywhere you can find it. It didn't happen like in the movies. There was no dramatic, rain-soaked meeting with some mysterious stranger. It was mundane. A slow burn. His name was Sean, and he was a dad from my son's school. We'd see each other at pickup, school events, birthday parties. It all started with polite smiles and small talk about the kids. But then our little chats started to get longer. Sean actually listened. When I talked, he made eye contact. He'd ask questions. He remembered little details I'd mentioned weeks earlier. It was such a simple thing, but it felt like a damn revelation. One afternoon, while we were waiting for the kids, I was telling some rambling, silly story about a frustrating trip to the grocery store. The kind of story I would never bother telling Lance because I knew he'd just tune out. But Sean was totally engaged. He was laughing at the right moments, nodding with empathy. And when I finished, he just looked at me and said, "You're really funny." Those 3 words hit me like a jolt of electricity. You're really funny. It wasn't about how I looked or what a good mom I was. It was a comment about me, my personality, my mind. It was this moment of pure validation. Someone saw the person buried under all those roles, and they liked what they saw. It was a feeling I hadn't even realized I was so desperate for. Our conversations quickly moved to text messages. It felt innocent at first. We'd share funny memes or complain about school projects, but that innocence started to bleed into something more. We began talking about our lives, our marriages. I found myself telling him things I hadn't told Lance in years. I told him about feeling invisible, about losing myself. And instead of trying to fix it, he just offered understanding. He said, "I see that. That must be incredibly lonely." He made me feel special. He was attentive. The compliments kept coming, not just about my humor, but about my intelligence, my perspective on things. An affair doesn't usually start with physical touch. It starts with this kind of emotional intimacy. For a woman who is emotionally starving, that kind of attention is intoxicating. It's like being in a desert and someone finally offers you a glass of water. You know you probably shouldn't drink it, but you're dying of thirst. The thrill was undeniable. That little buzz I'd get when his name popped up on my phone. The secret smiles we'd share across the schoolyard. It was such a stark contrast to the flat-line monotony of my marriage. This novelty, this excitement, woke up a part of me that had been asleep for a very, very long time. It felt like I was rediscovering the version of myself I thought was gone forever, the witty, interesting woman I was before I became just a wife and mother. The line between an emotional and a physical affair is blurry, and we crossed it one afternoon when we met for coffee. The conversation was intense. The connection was palpable. As we were leaving, he reached out and just touched my arm. It wasn't a sexual touch, but it was charged with everything we hadn't said out loud. In that moment, I knew. I had already betrayed my husband. The physical act was just a matter of time. It wasn't a conscious choice to hurt my family. It was this subconscious, desperate lunge for a lifeline. I was catching a glimpse of something that felt better, and I was too weak and too hungry to turn away. Living a double life is like trying to hold your breath underwater. At first, there's this rush, a sense of pushing your limits. But pretty soon, the pressure starts to build, your lungs start to burn, and you realize you're in constant, suffocating danger. My life became this meticulously compartmentalized performance. There was mom and wife me, and there was Sean's me, and the two could never, ever touch. The logistics alone were exhausting. It was a constant panic of deleting texts, clearing browser histories, and making up believable excuses for where I was. A trip to the grocery store turned into a secret meeting in a park. A book club night was really a coffee date. Every lie, no matter how small, felt like another brick in the wall I was building around myself. I became a master of deception, and the ease with which I could lie to the person I promised to love forever absolutely terrified me. The guilt was a physical thing. It sat on my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was the bitter taste in my mouth when I kissed my kids goodnight. I'd look at Lance, sitting on the sofa, completely clueless, and this wave of shame would wash over me that was so intense it made me feel sick. He was a good man. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to be betrayed by the one person in the world he trusted the most. The guilt kept me up at night, just replaying every lie, every secret. But then, the next day, a message from Sean would pop up, and that thrill would come rushing back, temporarily numbing the shame. The affair was my escape. It was this little bubble where I wasn't a tired, invisible mom. I was a desired, vibrant woman. In that bubble, I felt alive. The high from the validation, from being seen and heard, was a powerful drug against the guilt. It was an addiction. I was addicted to feeling wanted. This split was tearing me apart. The secrecy was like acid, eating away at my sense of self. I wasn't the honest person I always thought I was. The constant anxiety of getting caught was like a low hum of static in my brain, making it impossible to ever really relax. I became irritable and distant at home, not because I was falling out of love with my family, but because the mental weight of all the lying was crushing me. I was there physically, but my mind was always somewhere else, rehearsing my lies, checking my phone, just worrying. The great irony is that the affair, which I started to feel more like myself, ended up making me feel like a total stranger. I was acting in a way that went against all of my own values. This is the paradox of an affair born from neglect. You do it to try and reclaim a part of yourself you thought you lost, but in the process, you completely shatter your own integrity. You become a person you don't even recognize, let alone respect. The affair wasn't just a betrayal of my husband. It was a betrayal of myself. I was living a lie, and the person I was deceiving the most was the woman in the mirror. There's no good way for an affair to come out. It's either a slow, agonizing leak or a sudden, catastrophic explosion. Mine was the explosion. And it wasn't some brave, planned confession because I wanted to do the right thing. It was the desperate admission of a cornered animal. Lance had gotten suspicious. Not because he found anything, but because of me. The distance I'd put between us, which used to be just emotional, had become this tangible wall. My irritability, the way I was glued to my phone, my vague answers about where I'd been, it all started to add up. He's a logical man, and the logical conclusion was that something was very wrong. One evening, he confronted me. It was so quiet. The kids were at his parents' for the night. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with this sad confusion that was so much worse than anger, and he asked, "What is going on with you? Are you seeing someone?" The question just hung there in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I had two choices: lie again, or let the world I had so carefully built come crashing down. My body felt like it was shutting down. My heart was pounding in my ears. My hands were clammy. I couldn't form words. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And in my silence, he got his answer. The confusion in his eyes hardened into this dawning horror. I watched the realization hit his face, and I watched it crumble. It is the most painful thing I have ever witnessed. The man who had been my partner, my friend, the father of my children. He looked at me like he'd never seen me before. He looked at me with this mix of disbelief and just utter devastation. "Who?" he whispered, his voice cracking. And so, it all came tumbling out. The name, the lies, how long it had been going on. I confessed everything, the words spilling out of me in this torrent of shame and relief. With every word, I could practically see the trust he had in me, the very foundation of our life together, turning to dust. There was no shouting match, no dramatic scene. There was just this heavy, broken silence, punctuated by my choked sobs and the sound of his heart breaking. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The man I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger hollowed out by pain. He was filled with a rage I had never seen, and a grief so deep it seemed to radiate from him in waves. We tried to talk, but it was useless. He was in shock, and I was drowning in guilt and regret. The shame was an all-consuming fire. I hadn't just broken his heart. I had shattered his entire reality. I had taken our shared history, our memories, and tainted every single one. Our home, which was once our sanctuary, became a war zone of silent, agonizing tension. We were two strangers living under the same roof, just orbiting each other in this universe of pain that I had created. The nights were the worst. I would lie awake in the guest room, listening to him moving around the house, sometimes hearing him break down into sobs. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that our life as we knew it was over. The trust was gone. I understood in that moment that it might never be rebuilt. I hadn't just cheated on my husband. I had detonated a bomb in the heart of my family. The consequences of an affair don't just stop with the couple. They ripple outwards, like a toxic shockwave that damages everyone and everything it touches. My selfish search for validation had catastrophic consequences for the people I loved most. The first and most obvious casualty was trust. Trust is the bedrock of a family, and I had pulverized it. Lance looked at me differently. All the warmth was gone, replaced by suspicion and hurt. Every time my phone buzzed, I could see his eyes flicker towards it. Every time I was a few minutes late coming home, I could feel his anxiety spike. Rebuilding that trust felt impossible, like trying to glue a shattered mirror back together. The cracks will always be there, a permanent reminder of the break. Our children, as young as they were, weren't stupid. Kids are incredibly perceptive. They sensed the tension immediately. The easy laughter in our home was replaced with these strained, heavy silences. They saw their parents, who had always been this united team, suddenly become two separate, miserable people. They started asking questions we couldn't answer. Why is Daddy sleeping on the couch? Why are you and Mommy sad? Seeing the confusion and fear in their eyes was a special kind of hell. Knowing my actions were damaging their sense of safety and stability was a heavier burden than even my own guilt. I had single-handedly put my children's world on a path toward being completely torn apart. Our relationships with our friends and family became strained too. How do you even explain this? How do you tell your parents, who absolutely adore your husband, that you're the one who betrayed him? How do you face friends who always called you the perfect couple? The shame wasn't just a private burden anymore, it became a public one. Friends took sides. Conversations got awkward. We were totally isolated in our own misery. The support system we had spent a decade building just started to crumble. Even if we somehow managed to stay together, I knew our relationship would be forever altered. It would always be divided into before and after. The innocence was gone. Resentment would be there, lingering like a poison, seeping into any attempt to fix things. The affair would always be the ghost in the room, the unhealed wound that could be torn open by the smallest thing. I had wanted an escape from a passionless marriage, but what I created was a living nightmare. The thrill of the affair was so fleeting, but the consequences are so profound and long-lasting. I had looked at my family, my beautiful, stable, loving family, and I had taken a sledgehammer to it. The realization that I was the one responsible for all of this pain, for my husband's agony, my children's confusion, the destruction of our home, was the most devastating consequence of all. It's a weight that I will carry for the rest of my life. In the devastating quiet that followed, with the wreckage of my family all around me, I was finally forced to look at the real why. It was never about Sean. He was a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the profound emotional neglect in my marriage, the slow erasure of my own identity. I had felt unseen, unheard, and unimportant for so long that I grabbed onto the validation from the first person who offered it. My affair was a misguided, destructive attempt to feel alive again. It was a desperate cry for attention from a woman who felt like a ghost in her own life. This is not an excuse. There is no excuse for the pain I caused. Cheating is a choice, a series of choices, and I made them. But understanding the motivation is so important for anyone who has been through this, on either side. It's rarely as simple as good versus evil. So often, it's about deep, unmet emotional needs, a longing for the emotional intimacy and connection that's gone missing. The crisis I created forced me to look at myself in a way I never had before. It was a brutal, agonizing process of self-discovery. I had to face my deep-seated insecurities and the low self-worth that made me so desperate for someone else's approval. I realized I had handed over the responsibility for my own happiness to my husband, and when he, for his own reasons, stopped providing it, I felt like I had nothing left. I had to learn, in the hardest way imaginable, that my value doesn't come from a man's attention. It has to come from inside me. I cheated. And in doing so, I blew up my family and caused irreparable harm to the person I promised to love forever. I will live with that regret for the rest of my days, but my confession isn't just about what I did. It's about the silent, creeping neglect that can kill a relationship from the inside out. It's a cautionary tale about what can happen when we stop really seeing the person right in front of us. My hope in sharing this isn't to be forgiven, but maybe to be understood, and perhaps to serve as a warning. Pay attention to the quiet spaces in your relationship. Nurture that emotional connection, because without it, even the strongest foundations can crack, and even the most picture-perfect lives can shatter into a million pieces. The healing is a long road, and the scars will always be there, but the first step is always telling the truth, not just about what you did, but about the real reason why.